Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the 2023 Kawasaki Versys 1000, and in this video, I'm going to make the case of why you should choose this over a cruiser. Now, I want to be clear, I'm also going to make a video in the future talking about why you should choose a cruiser over something more like this. So this isn't about trying to convince you to buy something that you're not interested in. This is about if you're looking for a certain type of bike to do a certain type of thing, this is making the case of why this may be better for you than a cruiser. And I'm gonna be honest, I have a bias towards this bike. It's one of my favorite bikes. And when I talk about comparing it to a cruiser, we can look at the Kawasaki webpage and say something like the Vulcan Vaquero, which is a 1700cc bike, a big bike. It's in the same, within a couple $100 price point of this bike. And I'm gonna make the case for this bike. Now, that being said, if you want the Vulcan, buy the Vulcan, there's no question. But if you're on the fence and you want something that can do long distances but also have a few more options, I'm gonna make the case for why this may be something you wanna consider, because in my mind, this is a better value bike. And of course, placing a value on a bike eliminates styling. Now, I bought a Kawasaki Z900 RS SE, and I could have just bought the Z900. It's essentially the same bike, and the Z900 is a better feature bike for a lower price. So I understand why you may want to spend on styling. However, we're going to talk about practicality and enjoyment of the bike, and that's where I'm going to sort of hit on this one. Is I think a lot of people are buying the wrong bike when the right bike is sitting right next to them in the showroom, at least the right bike for them. So that's what we're gonna talk about, and of course we're filming here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's PowerSports. If you have any questions about anything in the Kawasaki lineup, I have complete access to their entire product line, and I can film that for you. So if you have questions, make sure you subscribe, let me know in the comments below, and I'll answer you both in the comments, but also in future videos, so we can create a video database of all the information you would want to see. So let's get going with this bike. We'll introduce it, we'll talk about why you may want to consider it over a cruiser. So there are two key reasons why you would want to buy a cruiser. The first one is obviously the style. That's just what you consider to be a motorcycle, and I have no issues with that. Buy the bike you want. But if you're considering the bike purely for what it can do, for instance, good big cruisers are very good at going long distances in relative comfort, and if that's the kind of reason you're considering a cruiser, this should be on your shopping list, especially if you're open to new ideas, because a cruiser has to follow form first. It's form over function, right? It has to look like a certain thing. This bike was a bit of an anomaly when it first came out in the Versys 650 and then moved up to the Versys 1000. It is all about function decides what form it takes. Instead of form first, it's function first. And that function first attitude towards the design of this bike actually creates a couple things, actually a number of things, that make this very, very good at what it does, and frankly, better than cruisers at most tasks. So let's talk about that right now. So let's start with the seating position. A lot of people I talk to say, I don't really want a tall bike, and this is a tall bike, and that's one reason where they're not considering a bike like this. So they get something that's lower. Well, again, the Vulcan Vaquero absolutely has a lower seat height, and if you're a very short person, this may be a bike that's a little bit too tall for you. I'm about 6 feet tall. I'm quite comfortable. I can just about put my heels on the ground when I stretch down here, but just a hair, maybe a centimeter off the ground on both heels is sort of where it's comfortable to put both feet down, and of course I can relax. So it's tall, but it's not that tall. The other thing that people forget is even though it has a lower seat height on something like the Vaquero, it's about 200 pounds heavier than this bike, and this bike is already relatively heavy. So this one's about 567 pounds, and they list it without the saddlebags. I don't know why they do that, because the saddlebags are actually included, and on the Vaquero, they list it with saddlebags, so you could easily weigh this with saddlebags. But the point is, it's still close to 200 pounds lighter than something like Vaquero. So even though it's taller, it's still very manageable, fairly light to move around for a bigger bike. There are absolutely lighter bikes, but I don't think this is as intimidating as some people think it is because of its height. So let's talk about, if it's taller, is it more comfortable? Well, you sit very square on this, and if you think about a cruiser, your feet are a little bit more out and you can sit a little bit back further. But the general feel here is the exact same, that you're very comfortable over a long distance, and that's what this bike is built for. So now we're going to take a couple looks at some practical differences on this bike that are going to make a difference to you when you're riding longer distances. So let's start by talking about this windshield here. Now on a lot of cruiser bikes, what you have is a tall or low windshield, and that's about it. But you can see this one here, I can loosen these knobs at the side here, I can raise this up and I can raise this down, and you can adjust that on the fly, and being able to do that very quickly makes it able to have a more comfortable ride. So adjustability is good. A lot of time on a cruiser you would have to get a short windshield or a tall windshield, or sometimes you can get the quick release version, so you can get a short and a tall, but very often they're not that adjustable. The other thing with a typical cruiser windshield is it's all about style, and you can see this one's got a whole bunch of pieces and parts in there. The wind comes through the bottom on this one, which is designed, and then you have this huge opening here. What that does is the windshield creates a sort of negative air pressure here, and if it was all solid one piece, it creates a suction, and aerodynamically that can be a little bit more draining, it can be a little more tiring, it can create a lot of buffeting. So what you have here is this large opening to allow some air to come through, so the wind blast and the wind pressure is off of you, but the negative pressure behind the windshield is filled in by this gap here, which makes this an easier bike to drive without the buffeting. And of course, if it is going to buffet anywhere, you can adjust it up or down based on the wind conditions you're facing, and that makes it super handy. The other nice thing to have is a little bit of protection over here on your hands. So this is a standard cover over here. Let's take a little bit closer look on this side. So taking a look at this cover over here, again, if you're a cruiser, you have a certain style that you have to cover, but when function is first and styling is second, you can end up with something like this. Now they have these on dirt bikes and dual sport bikes. This is an on-road bike, so why would you have that? Well, it does a couple things for you. It takes the wind off of your general hand area, and that can help with the cuff of your sleeve. If you don't have it tucked in really tight, some wind can get up there, and this can generally deflect around that and give you a little bit more comfortable experience. It can make you warmer in cool weather, although this bike also comes standard with heated grips, which is a really nice function again for the value. But it also, if you've ever seen a stone chip go crack a windshield, imagine one of those coming towards your fingers. This is going to prevent that from hitting your finger, which makes it really nice to have a little extra protection. And again, it's a bike that allows function to be first and form to be second. One of the most interesting pieces of this bike is LED headlights down here, and then these cornering lights down here. Now on a typical cruiser, to match the styling, you're going to have a single headlight with a high and a low beam, and sometimes it's incandescent, sometimes it's LED. These of course are LED lights, and they are both on as regular headlights, they're both on as high beam lights as well. Now, when you have a modern bike with a sharp cutoff headlight, as you turn the bike, as you lean it one way or the other, you actually lose lighting on the way that you're going. So you lose lighting in the direction that you're turning. So if you turn this way, the headlight beam will lean with the bike, and you will lose lighting on the road. So instead of having driving lights that you can aim up into traffic, what this bike has is 3 individually aimed lights that are cornering lights. So when the headlights are on and as you're turning down different roads and everything else, you'll have, at a certain lean angle, one light will come on, and then another light as you lean more, and another light as you lean more. And each of these 3 LEDs are individually aimed to give you light in the direction that you're turning. It's something that they can do with a bike that has function first and form second. So it's really cool the way that works. You don't need that unaerodynamic accessory lighting up here. You can have them built in here, and they're giving you light where you need it and never shining it into the eyes of oncoming traffic, which makes you safer, because if you blind a driver with your headlights, they have trouble seeing you when those lights have gone from their eyes. So this is a really smart system to put light directly where you want it and nowhere that you don't. And this all works due to an IMU in this bike, so let's talk about that. So an IMU is a really underrated piece of technology that I think people kind of glance over in the spec sheet. So let's talk about what it is. I've done a separate video on it. You can check that out on my channel, the Inertial Management Unit. And basically what it is a computer that measures all kinds of things. So it can measure if the bike is doing this or that. It can also measure if the bike's doing this or that. It can measure lean angle and those kind of things. It can measure dive in braking, G-forces, all that kind of stuff. So basically every which way this bike could move, slide, rise, brake, dive, wheelie, all of those things, that unit can sense, and then it can start implementing certain things to react to that. So one of the simple implementations is those lights can come on as you're leaning, but another thing it can do is it can manage you into a corner. So this bike can manage itself into a corner with your braking system. It can sense not just the actual brake pressure, but the extra braking pressure that engine braking would give to this bike. And as you're heading into a corner, it really helps you trace the line because it knows exactly what you're doing by applying braking in the right way. So you've got braking benefits there. You've got traction control benefits as well. Traditionally on a bike like this, if you were to wheelie it and it just had traction control, it's going to sense the difference between the front wheel speed and the rear wheel speed. Notice that the wheel's slowing down, so it's probably assuming you're wheeling, and it puts the bike back down. This one still has that system, but because of the IMU, it can sense that you are rising and control it and safely put it back down as well. And of course, that's all if you had traction control on lower settings. This has traction control. It's going to keep you from doing all those kinds of things. But the point is, if you get into a corner a little hot and the rear end slides out, the bike knows that. It can work with your traction control and your ABS to do that. And that's the real benefit of a sport tourer like this over a cruiser. You can have much better performance in a bike like this for the same price, and that better technology allows you to do that regular cruising that you want to do. But if you get into a corner too hot because of a mistake or because you're having a sport riding experience, this bike can help protect you in ways that a cruiser can't. Not just from the geometry, which is set up to help you handle the bike easier, but also through the electronics. So let's talk a little bit more about the electronics that you get in this bike and how they affect your ride. So what you're looking at here is the top of your fork tube. Traditionally, you'd have sort of a cap there, and there's one on the other side that actually has a logo. It's a little harder to see. Actually, you can kind of just see it just over the hump of the tank there. It's got a KECS, Kawasaki Electronic Control Suspension. So again, just beyond my fingertip right there, and this section here. What this is both front and rear suspension is electronically adjustable, but also electronically controlled. So let's talk about how that works for you. So if you think about why you want a cruiser as a long distance bike, what you're probably picturing is big, cushy, comfortable seat and soft suspension that's really comfortable on a long ride. And in a lot of cases, that is what you get on a cruiser. Now, I will say that this seat, although it doesn't look like a cruiser seat, is big and comfortable. It's a little bit firmer, but I can tell you from experience that a little bit firmer seat can be nice as you're driving over bumps, because a too soft of a seat ends up being hard as well. So it's hard to explain, but that is a supportive seat is what you want more than a soft seat. Soft seat feels good in the showroom, supportive seat feels good on a ride. Now let's talk about the suspension, because what the suspension does is a couple things. I can turn on the key and I can adjust the preload suspension. So for instance, it has preload presets. So it's for just myself and my gear, myself, a passenger, and gear as well. So it can adjust the preload on the rear shock just at the touch of a button, and you can do it actually while you're riding. But the other thing the electronic suspension does is it monitors what's going on. It uses things like that IMU. If I jam on the brakes and the bike has a tendency to dive forward, what the electronic suspension can do can instantly firm itself up so the front end doesn't dive and you still have proper suspension performance while you're braking. That doesn't just improve braking feel, it improves braking performance, because you don't run out of suspension when you jam on the brakes, which means you're going to be stopping much shorter. But because it can stiffen itself up in situations where it needs to, it can also run in a softer position when you want it to be comfortable. And that's a real benefit to this bike, which again costs basically the same as a Vaquero. And you have this electronic suspension that gives you that smooth ride when you want it, but as you're diving into corners, as you're jamming on the brakes, and as you're accelerating, it can balance those forces out to keep traction on the ground, to keep traction when you're braking, and to give you that comfort. It's a really cool system that works really flawlessly. And it also blends easily with extra weight of a passenger, extra weight of gear. So really cool system that I think a lot of people don't realize this bike has. So we talked a little bit about a passenger and luggage. Let's take a look at the luggage that comes on this bike. It's got some cool features. So first of all, these are about 28-liter saddlebags. They're easy to open. You've got this little package in here. And if you want, you can get a sort of a cloth bag in here that fits exactly that. And you could take that out and take it inside with you and leave these on the bike if that's what you wanted to do. I personally don't think you need that. These do fit full face helmets, so that's another thing that some cruiser bikes don't do. This will fit that in there, but generally you're going to use these for luggage. And when you use it for luggage, I'm going to do something I don't like to do on video because it's a brand new bike and these are stiff. But when I use the ignition key here to get to this, I can unlock this from the bike. Now I have to give it a bit of a smack when it's brand new. They go on smoother when they are not brand new bikes. They have to be kind of moved in and out a little bit. But this whole rail holds onto these bags, and there's a little piece on the foot peg there that holds on. So you can take this off like this, and again, I'm going to give it a little smack here. And it's a little finicky the very first few times. So like I said, I don't like doing this live on camera the very first time, but we'll just make a quick cut and I'll pull it right off. All right, so we did make a cut there just because this front piece here always sticks on new bikes and I didn't want to struggle too much on camera. It wasn't too bad to pull it out. There is a bit of a technique, so make sure you learn how to do that as a dealer, but what you can do then is remove this. And the reason you can remove it is one, for style, but there's another reason as well. Let's talk about that. So the best reason to be able to pull these off is if you're going to a hotel or something like that, yes, these are lockable to your bike and all your gear would be safe in your bike, but this now becomes your luggage. You don't have to take luggage in your cruiser with you. That takes up bag space. This is what you can take inside. You can set that on the hotel room floor. They'll sit upright like that, and you've got everything you need for an overnight trip over and over and over again, easily on one handle. And again, because it uses the ignition key, no extra keys to worry about, just one ignition key to work these. They pop on and off the bike, no problem. So let's pretend you're going out, you've taken the bags off, and then you realize you had to pick something up. Well, you're gonna keep a little net, like most of us, underneath your seat, so you always have it with you, but where are you gonna connect that net to? Well, this little area here has a little area there and a little area there that you can hook a bungee cord around and have something secured over the back seat. So not only can you use the handle here, you have extra little pieces right there that are designed to help you carry cargo, even if you don't have the actual bags on the bike. So I'm going to film the dash in just 1 second here, but we're going to show you a quick overview of everything that's standard right here in your controls. So heated grips would be an accessory on many other bikes in the Kawasaki lineup, but you have them right here. Really nice to have. You also have an adjustable clutch lever here, so you can clutch and brake levers are both adjustable, so you can set them further out or further in as their stock position. So that's really comfortable. Here's some of your adjustable suspension there. You can set those preload settings right there with that button there. There's a mode button here up and down, which will control your display, and then there's cruise control over here. It's all a pretty slick system. The only button you're not seeing that controls some of your display is on the right side handlebar. There is a select button. So you have a reset button over here and you have a select button on your right hand throttle hand to help control your display, because there's a lot of options in there, but it's all very, very easy to use. Let's just take a quick look at it. We won't show you everything in there, but I want to give you a brief overview of what's already in there. So a lot of Kawasaki bikes have a TFT display. This one is the same idea, but it's a little different. You have a true tachometer here, and there's something about the coating on here on this particular model that allows it to sort of film a little differently. You can see if I put my hand in front, the white balance is better. There is a display in there for your preload that's a little harder to see on your screen, but the point is you have multiple rider modes here. So you're in the road mode right now. We can go up to the sport mode and we can cycle back down. So it starts with sport at the top, road at the middle, and you've got your rain at the bottom. So this bike has high and low power modes. We'll talk about that in a second. It also has traction control. It also has, of course, ABS. And then you have a whole bunch of functions in here. And as we cycle through, you can see the odometers up there. That's odometer, trip A, trip B. And then down here, the bottom section there, we're just gonna quickly cycle through that. You've got fuel efficiency, kilometers per liter, liters per 100 kilometers, that kind of thing. Fuel range, average speed, total time, battery voltage, and the fuel efficiency. Actually, you know what? This is what I was looking for. It is in the odometer area. So odometer is going to be trip A, trip B, odometer, and then you also have your lean angle. So this is shown as a graph. The green is showing there. If I straightened it up, that green would sort of move away. And then you also have your max lean angle, 24 degrees and 27 degrees currently on this bike right now. If we zoom in a little bit closer, you can sort of see those numbers there. Again, really tough to get the focus here on this right here, but you can see that you have those. And again, that's using that IMU to give you a few different things. The bigger point here is your cruise control is tied into here. You can connect your cell phone and have messages or notification if you have a message or a phone call or that kind of thing in there. You still have a traditional tack, and it gives you a little bit more space in the dash for some extra information, and it just works well. So let's talk about some of the powertrain tweaks on this bike compared to something like a cruiser, and something you may want to get used to and something you may or may not prefer. So now let's talk about power, and more importantly, how it's delivered. So a V-twin engine, which is what a big cruiser traditionally has, is going to be different than an inline-4 engine. And an inline-4, basically for the displacement, is going to make more power, but it's going to do it in different ways. V-twins are very good for torque down low in the revs, whereas an inline-4 is what they use in race bikes. So you might be thinking when you buy a bike like this, I don't really want a race bike engine. I want that torque, what you feel. Now what's cool about this engine is used in the Ninja 1000 SX. That is a sport touring bike that's a lot more sporty than this. And in that bike, it makes well, not significantly, but it makes a little bit more horsepower than this, significantly more horsepower than your typical cruiser. In this bike, they detune the peak horsepower on that engine. And usually people get worried about when a bike is detuned, I don't want a less powerful version. But the reality is the way they tune this bike takes away peak horsepower. Now you still have something like 127 according to Google. Kawasaki Canada doesn't give us that spec, but it's still quite a bit of power. And what it does is it broadens that torque band. So if you think about a bike and you want a lot of torque, this bike has that. Even fairly low in the revs, has a lot of torque, but it also has high horsepower. And the reality is you're gonna have more horsepower here, probably better fuel efficiency as well than a big V-twin. And in a lot of ways, it's a smaller engine. That 1043cc engine here is smaller than something like the Vaquero 1700, but it's quicker revving, it's more power, but it still has that torquey feel. And that's, I think, what some people forget, is you can have that torque in a inline four-cylinder. It just depends on how that engine is tuned. If you wanted peak horsepower for the racetrack, you'll take away some of that low-end torque and you can put horsepower up top in a high-revving engine, but that's not how this bike is tuned, and that makes it really good for different types of riding. Now, the other thing about types of riding I should mention is this one has a quick shifter up and down. Now, a cruiser would be like, I don't want a quick shifter. So what is a quick shifter? First of all, you're using your clutch to get into first gear. Once you're into first gear, moving up or down through the gears, if you want, you can have it turned on, you can do clutchless shifts. And what it does is there's a little sensor that instantly turns the timing off on the engine, or the ignition off on the engine, allows you to make that quick shift and instantly reapplies it. So you can have full throttle upshifts, and you can also turn the throttle off and go through downshifts and have rev matching downshifts without having to use your clutch. I'm not saying that this is a cruiser specific thing, but if you're talking about enjoyability in riding, sometimes just zipping through town, there's a mosquito in here. Sometimes zipping through town, you don't want to have to always pull that clutch in and out to switch through the gears, and this one allows you to instantly find the right gear without having to use the clutch all the time, and that can be something that's really appealing to some riders. Last thing I want to talk about before we talk about who this bike is really for is let's talk about a chain drive touring motorcycle. So a lot of people have issues with that because, of course, a belt drive is very little maintenance, and on a tour you wouldn't have to do any chain maintenance at all. If you go on a crazy long tour and you need to do some chain maintenance, this bike does have a center stand. So we're going to put that up on the center stand again. Not a super heavy bike, you just use some skill. Very easy to put up on that center stand, and that allows you to do your chain maintenance on the road very easily. The reason chain is nice is because it gives you a better performing, higher performing bike. You don't have those losses through the drivetrain. While it's on the side stand or the center stand here, what I'll do is show you not just the riding position, which is a little taller to climb up to now. You can see me here. I'll also show you the passenger accommodations. So a lot of people who are touring want to take extra passengers, and you can see over here, you sit nice and tall, you can see over the driver, you've got really good hand grips right beside you here. Obviously you can hold on to the driver as well, but you're in a really strong position, and if you get the top box on the back, you've got a backrest as well. That top box can come on and off just the same as the side boxes, so you can pare this bike down for in-town everyday use, or you can bring it up to take your passenger as well. And this is a fully capable bike of taking 2 passengers. The seat, although it doesn't look great on video, it doesn't look big on video, is a very large seat compared to a typical bike of this styling, and that makes it a great 2-passenger bike as well. So like I mentioned off the top of the video, I will do a video of why you would want a cruiser over a bike like this. I'll do that in the future. I have a bike in mind that I want to do that with. But if you are looking for a big, powerful, long-distance cruiser bike that really is something you're going to enjoy living with, I think this is something that should be on your list, especially if you're not married to that cruiser styling. It gives you lighter weight, more performance, better cornering, better braking, better wind protection, better almost everything from a purely technical standpoint, and you can get that for the same price as you would get for a Vulcan or a Vulcan Vaquero with much less technology. So it depends on what you're looking for, but this is a bike that I'm a huge fan of because it's both fun for around town use and fully capable to drive across the country and across the continent, as long as you're on pavement, which is what you would do with a cruiser anyways. So let me know if you like this video, if you like this bike. Tell me what you think specifically about this bike. If you own one, let me know how you're using it so we can create a video database of information for those who are researching about this bike. And again, if you're a hardcore cruiser rider, I should probably link to this part. I will do a why buy a cruiser over something like this in the future. We'll talk about that in the future. If you're looking to buy this bike, it's sitting here at Jim Gilbert's PowerSports right now. You can come check it out. This is Canada's largest volume Kawasaki dealer. They are awesome here. Also known as Canada's huggable car dealer. They really take care of you. So customer service is absolutely incredible, and the value at this dealership is amazing. So thanks to Jim Gilbert's for allowing me to film their bikes. We'll talk to you in the next one.